Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
Welcome to another episode of Highest Power, Church and State. I'm your host, Rick Pidcock, and we have a special in-studio guest today. Mark Wingfield, who is the executive director of Baptist News Global, is here in town, so he came over to the house and we discussed the role of the media during the second Trump presidency. But first, speaking of Trump, here is the self-proclaimed king himself on Friday sharing what he thinks about the media.
I think I'm president. Am I here because I'm president? But we had to take all of that abuse, even during the trials, we had to take tremendous abuse, like, these wonderful guys, they're not legitimate people, they're horrible people, they're scum. And you have to know that. And you're going to have these cases where you can't allow yourselves to be deflected. You just can't let it happen. You have such a higher calling. And I believe that CNN and MSDNC, who literally write 97.6% bad about me, are political arms of the Democrat Party. And in my opinion, they're really corrupt and they're illegal. What they do is illegal. It makes no difference how big a victory I had. I can have the biggest victory in history. It makes no difference what kind of a failure the other side has. These people are going to go after me. These networks and these newspapers are really no different than a highly paid political operative. And it has to stop. It has to be illegal. It's influencing judges, and it's really changing law, and it just cannot be legal. I don't believe it's legal, and they do it in total coordination with each other.
This was Trump speaking at the Department of Justice. It was a speech in which he once again called the 2020 election rigged and claimed the people who did this should go to jail. He said the Biden administration turned this Department of Justice into the Department of Injustice, and he called the January 6th defendants hostages. So how does the media cover these events? If the media agrees with Trump that the 2020 election was rigged, then they are given special access. But if they disagree with Trump, as any objective journalist would, then they're called illegal. We now have a situation where NBC News and NPR are replaced in the Pentagon with the likes of One American News Network and Breitbart. ABC News has given in to Trump's demands and settled with him. CBS News seems to be considering the same thing, and then Trump shut down the Voice of America. Meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC are being called out by an authoritarian president as being criminal. And the media, which is supposed to be protected by the First Amendment, is in an absolute crisis mode. So we need to have a conversation about the role of the media in our society today. Also, as a side note, there's this really obnoxious bird that suddenly showed up in our backyard recently that sounds like a rusty metal door squeaking with the rhythm of a smoke detector whose batteries are low. So we're going to try to minimize that sound in the post-production, but I apologize if it's still there. There may be only so much we can do. Here with me to discuss is Mark Wingfield, Executive Director of Baptist News Global, and he flew in here all the way to South Carolina just for this podcast episode.
For your birthday.
Exactly. So
happy birthday.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And I wanted to talk to you about the role of the media during this presidency in particular. And specifically, I was thinking about the First Amendment, because the First Amendment protects the freedom of religion, speech, the press, the people to peacefully assemble and petition the government. And it's interesting because BNG kind of covers all those spaces. And just as someone who leads a news organization, how do you think the media should be covering this Trump administration? And how do you think BNG is especially positioned to cover these events, especially given the experience with religion?
So we're recording this the day after the president shut down the Voice of America, which has been one of his objectives all along, because he really does not like truth tellers. And that has been their mission, to tell the truth in a democratic way around the world. And that's clearly not what he wants. We've seen alarming things from ABC News, capitulating early on the George Stephanopoulos business. We've seen alarming things from Jeff Bezos with the Washington Post and what he's done to their opinion pages. Predating this, we already have a bifurcated Wall Street Journal that has a reliable news organization, a newsroom, but their opinion section, their opinion pages, their opinion staff is so far to the right that they counterbalance whatever the news is doing. And that predated Trump. That's out of old school Republican business values, I guess, but it ends up in the same place today. What we're seeing in the marketplace today is an overwhelming preponderance of right-wing media outlets that range from Joe Rogan all the way through Tucker Carlson and all these podcasts and news services. I'm going to use air quotes around that. So many things that just are not balanced at all. And the left really doesn't have a counterbalance to that, except that we are accused of the mainstream media being, liberal, which is not really true if you start looking at it. So one of the things that I've had to deal with in this iteration of my journalism career, the second part of my journalism career, is the rules have all changed. What I learned in journalism school 40 years ago about balance and objectivity and being neutral just is out the window because in those days, it was assumed you weren't dealing with a pathological liar. And what we have now is someone who really disregards, abandons, loves tweaking lies. And people take that for granted. Last night, I got to hear a program done by Ira Glass of This American Life on NPR. And he was talking about 7 things he's learned. And one of the things he's learned is how it's like to live in an age of unreason. Mm-hmm. We are living in an age of unreason, where people not only don't want the truth, they celebrate not the truth. And so the whole landscape of how we operate has changed. I never envisioned I would have a time as a journalist where I would have to write, or where the New York Times would have to write in a news story, so-and-so said blah, 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 but that's not true.
Yeah.
But we have to do that all the time now. That's not true. It used to be you had to get someone else to say that's not true. Well, he's lying about that. But when it's a documented, provable falsehood, like Ukraine started the war with Russia, it's utter nonsense, right? But this is where we are today.
It's almost like people talk about having a family reunion and you've got that weird uncle who's got all his theories. Yeah. It almost feels to me now that like the mainstream media has become the weird uncle.
I don't even know what the mainstream media is anymore. It's not cohesive. But before any of that, what Trump effectively did was he maligned the mainstream media, ridiculed them. His whole thing should have been over when he mocked the disabled reporter. Mm-hmm. That should have been the end of Donald Trump. But it was not, because the people who follow him are energized by his cruelty. They're energized by his lies. And there's no other conclusion to come to now than that you like this, because you can't say you don't know what it is, and you can't say, well, oh, that's just the way he is. No, these are just out and out falsehoods. So he's been able to dismantle confidence in the media at a wide scale, right? And that allows him to be the arbiter of truth. I mean, it's hysterical that he named his social media platform Truth Social when he would know the truth if it bit him on the butt.
Yeah, I always want to put that in quotes, the truth.
Right, yeah, no, there's no truth there.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, because I remember when I was a conservative, and I was always listening to Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and all those guys, and there was everyone back then hated the media, too. And it was almost like Trump put his finger and tapped into something that was already going on, and he ratcheted it up. And he's, like, this past week, he's calling CNN, and he calls MSNBC MSDNC. He's calling them illegal. And I'm just like, conservatives have been seething at the media for so many years. And I'm just curious, like, why do you think conservatives are so against the media?
It's the same reason they're against modernity. Mm-hmm. It's challenging their beliefs. The media have not acceded to tell the story the way they want it told, even though the way they want it told is wrong. And so look at climate change. Look at all that's happening in climate change and the dismantling of the EPA and all of this. It's all based in lies. But these conservative folks, driven by the oil industry and others, have been saying for years, well, we don't like your narrative about global warming. Well, it doesn't make it not true that you don't like it, but because we don't like it, we don't want you to talk about it. Therefore, we're going to shut you down if you talk about it. And this is exactly where we are today. It doesn't change. I mean, global warming doesn't care whether you're telling the truth or not. It's still going to happen. And are we going to be informed or not informed? The whole thing's stupid.
Yeah, I heard today that they're actually talking about how because climate change is a fraud, they need to start charging people with fraud who promote climate change.
Well, yeah, this is exactly what's going on. And there's going to be an effort to take this out of schools. I mean, why do you want to kill the National Weather Service? I mean, my God, I grew up in Oklahoma, where the National Weather Service Tornado Center is based in Norman, Oklahoma. And they already tried to shut it down, and a congressman from Oklahoma got it restored. So you're going to shut down the service that alerts people about tornadoes, and we're going to go back like it's 1910 when you have to sort of just wait until it arrives. This is insane. Who wants that?
Yeah, how is lack of information a strategy?
Only to people who want to control and don't care who dies.
Yeah.
Literally, who dies.
So speaking of controlling everything, you've got one of the strategies Trump is using today is he's controlling the media's access. So, like, he started off by changing who has office space in the Pentagon. And we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend in the White House making fun of Zelensky for not wearing a suit, or for teeing Trump up to make fun of Rosie O'Donnell. So I'm curious, how does changing the media's access play into Trump's authoritarian politics?
It's all about bullying, it's all about control, and it's all about bullying again. It is an effort to sort of own the libs, which activates his base, makes them feel good about things. But ultimately, it's a denial of truth, it's a denial of access, and it's not only that, it's an elevation of untruth. So these alleged media outlets that are now in the White House press corps and given access, they're no more than glorified untrained bloggers. I mean, it just is insane.
Breitbart.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And what they do is not reliable, it's not trustworthy, it's not professional, but they will accede to his demands.
It's like earlier this year, I wrote an article on, Breitbart published an article about how the cartoon Bluey is woke.
Right.
And so, like, I'm sitting here writing a response article on why it's not woke, but those people now have access to the Pentagon.
So we've put the crazy uncle in charge of everything at this point. And we're going to all pay a price for it because the crazy uncle does not know how to drive the car. Mm-hmm. But this is what people said they want.
Yeah.
It's nuts. I don't believe it. I can't understand it. But that's where we are.
Yeah. And that's hard to process because it's like, you know, and there's a part of me that wants to say this is wrong. And I do say that in every piece that I write. But also there's another part of me that's like, we kind of need to live. Do we need to live with the consequences of what we voted for and realize it?
So my best friend and I have a ongoing debate about this. He is Hispanic, grew up sort of persecuted for speaking Spanish in his home, and had a rough time going up. He's a very successful businessman today, and he doesn't understand why his own people, have turned toward Trump and betrayed everything that you would assume they would value, particularly in Texas, where we are. But all of this is the reason I think our purpose for B&G is more relevant than ever. I am committed to telling the truth and keeping we've got to have a record of what's really happening. There's got to be a historical record, and we're going to do that every day, every week. We're going to keep plugging away, telling you what the truth is, so that there is a baseline you can refer back to on this. We're not going to be cowed by this. Now, I truly envision, if this thing keeps going the way it's going, Trump and his minions will go after people like us and try to shut us down. They'll try to deny our nonprofit status. The whole test of everything right now is loyalty to Trump.
Yeah.
I just this afternoon listened to a piece on the radio where an elected official in another state, his main credential is loyalty to Trump, and he's telling people how no one's more loyal. This is idolatry. It's just insanity.
You brought up the Voice of America, and speaking of loyalty to authoritarians, it's interesting. An NPR says that the Voice of America reaches like 50 million people in closed countries that are, with the news, and that the countries who are celebrating its demise are Iran, China, and Russia. So it's just interesting that we have an authoritarian president shutting down a news agency that reaches into areas that are dominated by other authoritarians, and those authoritarians are celebrating it.
And those authoritarians are the people Trump thinks are his friends and he most closely identifies with. And this is what so-called law and order Republicans have given us. Yeah. It's nuts. And just in a word, the whole thing it is upside down, it's opposite, it is hypocritical, it is insanity.
But it also makes sense because, we've written a number of pieces over the last couple of years that have compared what they want to do with how they currently run Christian schools, right, and their homes. It's like, they're wanting to expand their walls to society. And
well, it's the strong father. It's the it's the strict father model. According to George Lakoff, it is this authoritarian kind of mentality that they like in the home and they like in the school, and they think this is going to work, but it always backfires.
Yeah, especially in hierarchy, there's always another authoritarian who's going to take over at some point or who wants more power.
And hierarchies just never work.
Yeah.
They always collapse on themselves, and this collapse can't come soon enough.
Yeah. So I shared the other day on Facebook this graphic from Media Matters that shows the top right and left-leaning podcasts, and it's interesting to, just like with talk radio, the podcast world is overwhelmingly dominated by the right. And when you look at the different hosts, you've got some non-religious ones like Joe Rogan, but the majority are people like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Candace Owens, Russell Brand. These are all people who are theologically motivated. And yet, when you look at the left-leaning shows, they don't really deal with theology. So I'm curious, why do you think the left isn't engaging with the theology of Christian nationalism so much? And is there any way we can encourage those on the left to start dealing more with the theology behind the authoritarian Christianity that's attacking us?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've been behind on this for decades. Not years. We've been behind for decades. And here's an illustration of it. Think about what the average American thinks is the predominant view of the end times. They think it's left behind. Mm-hmm. They think it's premillennial dispensationalism, when in reality that is a minority view, but the people who've been promoting this have been so loud for so long. They've written books, they've made movies, they've done all these things to promote their relatively new, in the scheme of things, theology that is a minority view, but they've been so loud with it that the average American probably thinks that is the normative view, when it's not. But they've captured the public mind with their content. And that's just one other illustration of how the rest of us are behind, because we've just assumed reason would prevail. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't.
Well, on that note, Mark, I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us today.
Really happy to do so, and thrilled with the podcast and what you're doing here, and thanks everyone for listening.
There are two dangers at play here. On one hand, as we considered last week in my interview with Janet Kellogg-Ray, conservatives undermine the truth by dismissing the role of experts. Everyone can do their own research and come to conclusions that are at least as equally valid, if not superior, to the overwhelming consensus of scientific data. On the other hand, conservatives undermine truth by firing those who give us the information we need to prepare for emergencies and to hold authoritarians accountable. Two ways the media helps us stay free are by informing us of what scientific consensus says and by reporting what authoritarians are up to. So when a movement overwhelmingly demonizes the media, it should raise some red flags about their relationship to authoritarianism and power. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.